The main character lost her parents at an early age, and during her period of loneliness, she managed to find an unexpected hobby for herself, which turned out to be fantasy novels. The protagonists of such stories often meet with absurd incidents after which they get into the unfamiliar and the world. That day, a girl was discussing with her friend a character that had traveled to another dimension after dying in a traffic accident. And while they were talking, the same thing happened, and the girl could never think that she would repeat the death of that character. So, being under the wreckage of the car, the main character could not believe that she would die in such a way. But it was completely unimportant because she thought that she had no reason to live on. But she hoped that her friend, who had always been there for her and supported her through the toughest times, would be able to get through it. And so, pulling up to the hand of her friend, all that the protagonist asked for is that she was allowed to find eternal happiness. But suddenly, she heard a strange voice and realized that such a thing could be seen only fantasy in the world, and wondered if she died and went to heaven. But when she opened her eyes, she couldn't believe what she was seeing, because a few seconds ago, she'd been crushed by a bus, and now she was in the middle of a battlefield. But it wasn't long before she was attacked by an armed guy, and all the frightened girl could do was scream for him to leave her alone. Then her attacker's sword caught fire, but she couldn't believe she had done it on her own until she noticed that her hands were also on fire. And then she started to turn around and try to figure out what had happened. And it turned out that all the people who wanted her dead were now consumed by fire. And there was a voice of a guy who ordered his troops to lay down their weapons. And then approaching the main character, apologized for such insolence and stated that his soldiers were very afraid of strangers, and then introduced himself as a young man named Eric Krovia. But he explained that everyone addressed him as a prince, that he was on the battlefield because he had nowhere else to go, and explained to the girl that he was just about to be killed, but her magic scared the enemy and made him run away. So the protagonist saved his life, and he wasn't going to question her about who she was or where she came from. And if she needed a safe place to go, he offered to go with her. In the end, the protagonist accepted Eric Krovia's proposal. But the citizens of the empire had a very hard time accepting the girl, and they constantly scolded Eric Krovia for the fact that he brought someone unknown. But the guy kept defending the protagonist, reminding her that she was his guest of honor and should be treated with the respect she deserved. And the protagonist realized that no matter how powerful her magic was, she could do nothing in a world completely unfamiliar to her. And she needed a strong support, and Eric Krovia needed her help. So she became the sword that led the empire to victory and allowed Eric Krovia to ascend to the throne. And in return, awarded her a ducal title despite being a woman of unknown origin. And at first, many of the nobles were extremely displeased with it. But when she conquered the lands of the strongest opponent of their empire, such sentiments immediately disappeared. In the end, and 10 years later, the protagonist was in the ballroom of the imperial palace. And then her appearance was announced. And Serena Artes, the Duchess of the Empire, entered the hall, and everyone around was delighted by her appearance, and the aristocrats just couldn't take their eyes off her. As soon as the emperor saw her, he greeted his goddess, but she only awkwardly remarked that she had asked him to dispense with such addresses earlier. But he only remarked that her blonde hair suited her very well. But she grudgingly asked Eric Krovia to save his compliments for his fiancée because she was soon ready to drill a hole in her because of jealousy. But the guy said with a smile that Serena didn't have to worry about that because it was just a political alliance between them, and that girl also understood that. After which the satisfied king declared that today's banquet was held to welcome the most honored guest from the kingdom, and invited everyone to start drinking and having fun. But displeased, Serena Arts noticed that it was strange to call the guy their guest of honor, because the situation was more like that of Eric Krovia blackmailing the defeated kingdom and holding their prince hostage. But she asked where their guest of honor was, and initially Eric Krovia was surprised by such a question, but afterwards he guessed the reason, and calmly pointed his finger at the crowd of gathered nobles, and explained that the prince had to stay in the wing for the time being. And so Eric had to introduce him to those noblemen beforehand, and then asked if the protagonist had seen the blonde-haired young man. And then looking around at everything Serena Arts thought about, she realized that the guy was really incredible, and realized that even though she herself was a hypertrophied, powerful heroine of a crazy fantasy world, this guy was from a different genre. And then Eric Krovia noticed that the main character liked guys with such a face, because they seemed very nice to her. But she looked at the young man and only wondered who could not like such young people. But at that moment, the emperor was approached by his fiancée and smilingly announced that it was time for their dance, because everyone was expecting it. And then looking at the couple, Serena Artes thought that it was a great relief for her that they were supposed to be together. But at that moment, suddenly someone turned to Serena and asked her if she found this kind of celebration a bit boring. After which the guy asked if the main character could do him the great honor of dancing with him. But she only calmly reported that she was not interested in dancing. And then, surprised by the refusal, the young man thought that Serena Artes just did not want to dance with him. But even looking at such a pitiful face, Serena Artes remained adamant. But then taking her hand, the guy leaned in to kiss her and informed her that he was sure to make Serena's heart flutter. And in the end, surprised by this kind of girl, she agreed, but warned me that she really wasn't a very good dancer. In the end, when they danced together to the sound of the orchestra, the young man finally introduced himself. His name was Ricardo Arena, but the guy didn't mind that the protagonist called him by his first name. But she still observed the subordination, after which she gently intercepted the young man and, approaching, whispered a question about what he wanted to tell her when he promised to make her hearts flutter. But then she thought she'd agreed to this dance just for that question, but he didn't seem to know anything, so she was about to leave. But at that moment, the young man said that he actually felt like he could give the protagonist her heart back. And at that moment, Serena actually thought she felt her heart beating. But of course, that was impossible because she didn't have one. And she realized she didn't have a heart until 2 years into her stay on this world. And under the pretext of completing the process of conquest, Serena Artes searched the place where history began on this world because she thought she lost her heart there, and she thinks she was just having some kind of crazy attack at the time. In the end, she decided to discuss it with Eric, but he warned Serena Arts that they should keep such a conversation a secret because the people were already very worried that Serena had a huge devilish power, and they could not be allowed to find out more about it. But even after Serena Artes discussed it with Eric, she continued to search for a way to get her heart back. And she herself wondered why she couldn't just forget about the heart and live peacefully with unimaginable power. In fact, the girl had survived countless battles and injuries that would have killed any other person instantly. And she wondered if she would have to spend her whole life like this and not even learn how to use her powers, and reflected that she could have been left in this world all alone for tens and thousands of years. And so she wanted to go back and become a normal person again as she'd been before. But in the end, these words from Ricardo Aaron took her out of balance. And so she led him away against all manners, which made the aristocrats worried because they thought that the prince might be very much attracted to the girl, or that she planned to kill him. But she knew that no one knew the secret about her missing heart for her and Eric Crovia's safety. And so she didn't know how the prince from another country had gotten wind of it, and she made him tell how he knew about her heart. But the next moment, the guy started asking her to stop and let go. And then Serena Artes noticed his flame that was the same as hers and wondered who he really was, because she knew that in all the time she'd been alive, she'd never met a man with powers like hers. But she could definitely feel the pulse, and that meant Ricardo Aaron had a heart unlike her, and didn't understand where this guy had come from. But he only rubbed his neck to ask Serena Arts to calm down and assured him that he would tell everything now. It was 10 years ago, and he was visiting fields in his country when he saw something strange. There lay a heart emitting a purple light, and when he touched it at the same moment, he was drawn into a dark cave, and then the prince thought that perhaps he had fallen underground. But the next moment, he noticed that now the dragon was in front, and he seemed dead. And then the guy realized that he should have taken emergency provisions with him, because he did not know how long he would have to stay in this place, because it would have taken a lot of strength to climb back up. But the only thing he could eat was the dragon in front of him. But when he tasted his meat, he realized that his throat was burning and sore. Finally, it was worth swallowing a piece of dragon flesh. His eyes darkened dramatically, and he didn't know how much time had passed. But when he opened his eyes and came to his senses, he felt an unimaginable power surging inside him. And finally, without thinking twice, he started climbing up, and within a week, he was finally able to get to the surface. And soon he returned to his home, and a couple of years later, rumors that a duchess from a neighboring state had come to their kingdom to find something there spread quickly. But disgruntled Serena Artes demanded that the guy explain what he wanted to tell her with his story, and whether her heart had been with the dragon all this time, and trying to understand how Ricardo Arena realized that the heart belonged to her. But Ricardo Arena only wondered if Serena Artes knew anything about his homeland. But she only remembered that their country's coat of arms featured a dragon. And then Ricardo Arena explained that as proof of her friendship, the founder of the country had given her heart to the dragon, and in return had received their power. And when her power increased, She could throw giant rocks with one finger and split mountains in two with one swing of her sword. But then Serena Artes realized that the story was about her powers, and she had heard the legend before, but only took it for silly fiction. And now having witnesses changes everything. So she turned around and realized she had to go to that kingdom. But Ricardo Rena wanted to ask her one question and offered Serena to be his wife. And then a disgruntled Serena Artes realized that he was asking her to be his wife in exchange for information about her heart. But he calmly informed her that it wasn't about that at all, and he was just asking if Serena Arts would let Serena be her spouse. As a result, a disgruntled Lori Aines showed Serena an article a little later about the recent incidents at the ball, and unhappily asked if Serena Arts really went on a date with the prince on the terrace, and stated that it was clearly a lie and they should sue these rivals. But Serena Arts only asked with a smile if it really seemed impossible that two unmarried people could go on a date. But she only grudgingly stated that Serena should have used her fortune long ago to lock up scoundrels like those gossip columnists. But Serena convinced her that it wasn't necessary. She thought it was funny and asked her friend to stop being nervous and answer a question, because Lori was her only friend and ancient history was her specialty. But the surprised girl only wondered why suddenly Serena Arts was so interested in the stories of the kingdom lately. But she awkwardly made an excuse to herself that she just wanted to culturally enlighten herself. After all, she knew perfectly well that she couldn't tell her friend about her lost heart. And then Lori Aines said that there was indeed a legend that said that the founder of the kingdom gave her heart to a dragon. Though it sounded absurd, but that was the story. But afterwards asked curiously what had happened at the ball, for she never answered. And then Serena Artes calmly said that nothing unusual had actually happened, because the prince had only proposed to her, and also told a couple of interesting stories. She remembered that she had refused his offer immediately after it was made, not understanding why Ricardo Rena would say something like that, though she noticed that it was really hard to refuse, looking at the prince's sweet face. But he calmly said that his offer might also be favorable to Serena, for she had certainly thought that she would like to go first to the kingdom to seek her heart there, and said that most likely Serena Arts will not be able to do it, and explained that this is due to what happened in his country after his return. In fact, when he came back, everyone was very excited that the prince was alive, because they didn't believe it anymore. But then the queen turned to him and, ordering all to be silent, approached her son and stated that she was very glad that the boy had arrived safely, but grabbed him and wondered what had happened to him. And so began a series of horrible experiments on him, because the scientists wanted to create soldiers as strong as him to fight the Empire's most powerful Duchess. And he endured real torture every day for years. And the experiments only ended when Ricardo Rena lost his dragon powers. And so now the kingdom was the queen's private residence, and almost no one could get into that residence. And stated that this was the reason why even an imperial duchess like Serena couldn't get into these lands so easily. But things would be different if they were married. And then a disgruntled Serena Arts thought about how strange a marriage between a member of the royal family and an imperial duchess would be, but found that Ricardo Rena was clearly lying about losing her powers from what she'd seen recently. But he explained that it was the only way he could stop these ghastly experiments, and wondered what the girl thought of his suggestion. As a result, Serena Artes was now at the tea party thinking that she could agree to this proposal, because if necessary, she could always make the prince pay for his actions. And turning to Lori, Aines asked if she knew where the prince was now. And she said, after a moment's thought, that the prince was a guest at the imperial palace. And that's when Serena Artes realized she had to go to meet the prince, and explained to her surprised friend that she was going to the prince to accept his proposal of marriage. She ended up meeting with Eric beforehand, who grudgingly wondered if Serena was really that interested in that prince, though he wasn't opposed to the marriage if that was what she wanted. And Serena Arts only noticed that she did not expect that even the emperor himself would approve her idea. But Eric Crovia understood that such a decision should be made by the girl herself, and no one would dare to express dissatisfaction. She had always had the right to dissolve her engagement or marriage, which he was glad of, but she asked him in surprise what this was about, for he had previously authorized her to marry a prince. But Eric Crovia said he knew he couldn't stop this girl, but he was concerned about Serena's condition, for she herself had said earlier that her emotions were becoming less and less vivid every day. And this only strengthened his excitement, because at times he really thought Serena's condition was quite dangerous, and Eric Crovia was really worried that someday Serena Artes wouldn't be able to feel love at all. But she said with a smile that she didn't feel any love for Ricardo Rena, even though she was interested in him. But she admitted that she had a favor to ask of Eric, and it was probably unpleasant. But Eric Krovia calmly said that whatever Serena Arts wants, she'll get it right away. But when she whispered her wish in his ear, the man seemed to go mad at what he heard and stated that Serena Arts could have asked for anything but that. But the girl rather thought that such a thing would be very profitable to sell. Serena Arts ended up going to Ricardo Oren's room in the Imperial Palace a little while later and pondered where she could best start the conversation. But in the end, no sooner had she knocked on the door than her presence was noticed by a young man who opened the door and invited her in. But Serena Artes wondered where all his servants who were supposed to be opening the doors had gone. But the prince explained that he didn't like having too many people around him, and Serena probably didn't like it either. And then she remembered a situation when she noticed a fly and wanted to kill it. But in the end, when it landed on the butler's face, she slapped him, causing the man to lose consciousness. And so Serena Artes wondered if the prince might have had a similar situation. But Ricardo Aaron awkwardly pointed out that although he had similar situations, no one had fainted because of his blow. Eventually, Serena Arts sat down and told Ricardo Arena that she had actually come because they never got to finish their conversation at the ball. But Ricardo understood Serena Arts' feelings because it was really quite strange to get offers like that, so it could be very shocking, and said that if Serena Arts wanted to, they could draw up a contract and negotiate the terms in advance, and warned that if Serena Artes wanted to have a lover, he'd be okay with it because he could bear not to stand in her way. And then the shocked protagonist only wondered who this prince thought she was, and whether he thought she was such a horrible girl. But in the end, she tore up the paper and said that although she had agreed to the prince's terms, it didn't matter, because if he answered her questions honestly, she would accept his offer, and asked Ricardo what advantage he wished to gain by marrying her, and what his purposes were, for she had a feeling he was in league with the queen, and wanted to use her, and didn't see if instead of marrying the girl who was the cause of his wretched condition, he should take revenge on her, because it was the most logical thing to do. But he was embarrassed to realize he still remembered the day he first saw Serena, because it wasn't at a ball. And it was the very day Serena Arts came to destroy their kingdom. Eventually, then bowing before Serena, the king offered the dragon heart to the sword of the empire as a sign that they were surrendering. She looked at Eric Krovia and wondered if this was the famous gem the emperor had always told her about. But he calmly confirmed her guess. But the disgruntled king will only reflect on the fact that they are now handing over a national treasure to some unknown duchess. Especially not a simple treasure, but the very heart of a dragon, and she didn't even know about it. But then she picked it up and accidentally broke it. And then everyone was really shocked by something like that. And Serena was upset because she hadn't meant to do it. And the king who handed over the gem just sobbed in shock, not understanding what Serena Arts had done to the dragon's heart, which was the purest gem in the world. Eric Krovia tried to calm the man down, explaining that the Duchess had obviously not done it on purpose. In that moment, Ricardo realized that the time of this cursed kingdom had finally come to an end, and no matter what Serena's intentions were. And it was thanks to her that the Queen's laboratory was destroyed, where he suffered endlessly. And then Ricardo Rena decided that the heart of his savior would be returned to her, no matter what it cost him, and stated that perhaps he had already fallen in love with her. But disgruntled Serena Arthas seemed absolutely disbelieving of such an outcome. But the prince calmly stated that it was only one reason he wanted to help the girl. He wished Serena a successful invasion of the kingdom and the return of her heart, which had been hidden from view for so long. And he wanted Serena Arts herself to trample the last hopes of this kingdom, and he was eager to finally see it. Serena Artes said that she liked such reasons much better, and said that in that case, she agreed to call the guy by his first name from now on, as he had asked. But she had one condition. Ricardo Rena must not fall in love with her. It would be a burden. And then shocked and such a request, the guy just agreed to those terms, understanding Serena Artes' feelings. And that's how their partnership and working together eventually began. And Serena Artes said it's time for them to start preparing for their wedding. Eventually later, Serena Artes came to the jeweler and handed him a box stating that she wanted to show him something. And then he took out the stone. He couldn't believe it was the same legendary dragon's eye from the kingdom. But Serena Artes awkwardly reflected that she hadn't known what the stone was called before. A couple hours ago, a servant came into her office to tell her that Eric Krovia had sent Serena a gift and enclosed a note. It said that because of Serena Artes' sudden marriage, he had to get the stone off his crown, which took a long time. But Serena Artes just thought that no matter how much Eric Krovia cussed, he sent her the stone anyway. Then she thought about the fact that when she had crushed the hearts of a god, the government of the kingdom had granted Eric another exquisite gem, namely the Eye of the Dragon. But in the end, she went to the jeweler and stated that if he had already looked at that stone, you should have put it in the ring without anyone knowing about it. But he wondered if the Duchess really wanted him to crush a beautiful gemstone to fit it into a modest ring, for he had never received such an order before in his life, and wondered if the Duchess didn't like the previous ring. But she calmly said that the ring wasn't really for her and hoped Ricardo Arena would like it. And the jeweler wondered if it would be a wedding ring. But the next moment there was a noise as someone entered the room. And then Ricardo turned to Serena, who with a smile asked if the Duchess had already chosen something suitable for herself. And she did not understand why he was here, because she had previously asked him to wait. The ring was supposed to be a surprise, and the prince asked what Serena Artes had in mind. But she calmly stated that any piece of jewelry would look great on Ricardo. And for that reason, she decided to take absolutely all the men's jewelry that was there. But the madly excited prince informed her that it was not necessary at all. But Serena Artis noticed that the empire's most powerful duchess was getting married, and it was the least she could do for her fiancé. As a result, a little later awkward prince thanked the protagonist for such generosity, because absolutely did not expect it. But for Serena Arts, it was really nothing, and despite the fact that Ricardo Arena very much wanted to repay the protagonist and take on the cost of organizing the wedding. But she calmly explained that there was no need for that since Eric Crovia had told her that such expenses would be covered by the imperial family. And then the awkward prince revealed that he actually had to look like he really needed to get married, since the kingdom had another pretender to the throne. And so lest this pretender and his allies defeat him, he had to prove that their alliance was the epitome of pure love and not an attempt on the Duchess's strength. Serena Artes only grudgingly reflected on the fact that it seemed to her that planning the wedding alone should be enough for that, since they actually had many opponents besides the royal family. And their opponents were also some imperial aristocrats, and thought that these pests would definitely do anything to prevent their marriage, because they would obviously be against some unknown duchess gaining power by marrying a prince of another country. But Ricardo Arena only stated that Serena Artes clearly did not have the best relations with the aristocracy, and then asked if the girl had a shard of dragon heart, for they could collect some of their works and send it to their foes, together with their thanks for their loyalty and good service to the empire. And then a surprised Serena Artes wondered if this could really work out between them. But Ricardo explained that all aristocrats had a desire to be recognized by their ruler, and this desire was as great as their lust to oppress those below them. And then Serena Artes realized that it was an interesting proposal, and she was also curious to see how they would respond. But then she noticed that she was happy to be married to Ricardo Arena. But at that moment, the guy offered to let the servants discuss their wedding among themselves as much as they wanted, because the rumors were far more powerful than Serena Arts thought. But after being surprised, the prince noticed the huge amount of presents they were carrying in the carriage. And then Serena Artes stated that as the prince had previously stated, the rumors were really strong, because if he really wanted to enter high society, such behavior was simply necessary. As a result, and a little later, the girl addressed to the butler apologized for her unexpected visit without warning, which caused inconvenience. But the butler said that there was absolutely nothing wrong with it, because they were really flattered by her visit. And then Serena Artes thought about the fact that Ricardo Arena had said earlier that he had been invited to this place for an evening of reading and poetry. But for Serena, it was even boring to talk about. But she thought about the fact that Ricardo Arena had adapted quite well to life in the empire's high society, even as a prisoner from another country. And she wondered how he was feeling. And then the butler bowed and invited the Duchess into the room. And then she, approaching the door, heard the talk of the aristocrats, who said that they could voice their opinions because the Duchess was not here. And the Baron stated that apparently everything that had happened since the first meeting with Serena was Ricardo Arena's original plan. And it was not clear what the prince really needed, love or Serena's status. But he stated that he had never lied to the Duchess, and besides, now the aristocrat's remark could be interpreted as a contemptuous attitude towards the Duchess's decision. But the flustered lad said it wasn't that simple at all, and the Duchess didn't often deal with men, so he was worried about her. But at that moment, the girl could not stand it and laughed, which did not go unnoticed by Ricardo Arena, because he immediately realized that it was her. And then the surprised girl said that it was really amazing that Ricardo Arena could hear her from here, for the boy's dragon powers were truly remarkable. The prince smiled happily at the compliment. Then he said that he and the Duchess had the same feelings for each other, and they both fell in love at first sight because Serena Artes had always treated him with unimaginable kindness, and he did not understand whether he really could not have a weakness for such a woman. But at that moment, before the aristocrats became completely enraged, Serena Artes appeared in the room and apologized for the intrusion and stated that her behavior was indeed beyond the bounds of propriety, but she felt it was simply necessary to visit one of the guests. Whereupon she bowed to the countess, apologized for interrupting the literary evening, and inquired if she could not be so kind as to visit her residence a little later. And the woman stated with a smile that it was really a great honor and asked what the meeting would be about. And Serena Artes stated that it was a really great question because she will be holding a ball in honor of her engagement to Prince Riccardo Arena, and added that the celebration will be held at her estate in a week. As a result, a little while later, an ecstatic girl ogling Serena Artes literally couldn't be happy that she was finally getting married. After thanking her, Serena Artes introduced the girl to the young man and informed him that Marina was her personal designer, and she would prepare Riccardo Arena's costumes for the upcoming ball. And then Marina bent down and promised that everything would be done in the best way, and then said that she had never had such an inspiring model since the time of the emperor. But at this point, Serena Artes awkwardly announced that even though Riccardo Arena was indeed gorgeous, there was a bit of a problem, as the ball was only a week away. And then a shocked Maria, who was at first confused, stated that Serena Artes could give her this task, for she would select the most fashionable and exquisite suit in the entire empire for Prince Riccardo Arena in time, after which she masterfully began to take his measurements, and in a second went running further, informing him that she would bring several options. But at that moment, Riccardo Arena, left alone, asked why Serena Artes had decided to prematurely announce their engagement. And then thinking, and Serena Artes stated that it must have been a really unexpected proposal, but explained that she had received a reply from the noble house after sending them a gift. And they were really shocked when they saw the sculpture decorated with dragon heart shards, and decided to write her a letter urgently. And reading their letter, Serena Artes realized that they really liked the gift. So she decided that now was the perfect time to announce their engagement. Finally, at this time, Marina gathered all the matching outfits and with the help of her assistant brought them to the room and had Riccardo try them on. Ended up while the prince was at the fitting. Then Serena Artes quietly mused that she'd like to buy everything the prince tried on from them today. And she thought about how she'd always wanted to spend money like that because she'd been obsessed with romantic movies before she came into this world. And if she hadn't used techniques like that from there, she wouldn't have gotten that chance again. But eventually, the next moment she was approached by Riccardo Arena, who had changed clothes, and asked the girl to appreciate the next outfit. And then her face changed from joyful to shocked when she saw the young man. And looking at him, she couldn't look away. While Marina said that in all her years of working as a designer, she had never seen a suit fit someone so well, and stated that it was thanks to Riccardo Arena that this outfit was able to shine once, and yet she felt that something was missing. And then thinking, and Serena Artes said that she brought something that she had prepared in advance that she wanted to use as a finishing touch. Looking at his ring, Riccardo immediately recognized that it was a dragon's eye, but Serena Artes stated that she simply could not give her future spouse something cheap. But the embarrassed prince stated that he wasn't sure he could take something like that. And then thinking about his words, and Serena Artes realized that maybe it was too expensive for him, because it was just a contract marriage. So she said that if Riccardo Arena would feel more comfortable, he could look at the ring as a down payment, and maybe that would make it a little easier for him to accept the gift. After that, she asked Marina what she thought of the ring, and she stated that it was really perfect, and Serena Artes had never disappointed her with her taste. So she was sure that Prince Riccardo Arena would definitely outshine everyone at the ball. In the end, a little later leaving the designer, Serena Artes realized that the fitting had taken them a little longer than expected, and it was already late, so she offered Ricard to stay with her for the night. The Duchess at once noticed that the young man looked somehow discouraged, and so she inquired whether he did not like the clothes. But Riccardo reported that he mentally returned to the jewelry every time and believed that she had chosen this gift for His Majesty and had decided to give it to him. And then, shocked by such a statement, Serena Artes literally couldn't believe that Riccardo Arena actually thought something like that. After all, she had never been that close to Eric, but she thought about his addressing her as a goddess because not everyone could understand such a joke. and probably from the outside they really appeared to be very close. But she explained to Ricard that she wanted to clarify one detail, because nothing would ever happen between her and Eric, because all chances for that had long since ended. And she understood Ricardo Urin's concern, but he could care less. And no matter what anyone thinks, she's not gonna sugarcoat their prenup. And besides, she didn't even find Eric Crovia attractive. Then the guy couldn't stand it anymore, so he approached Serena and pressed her against the door, wondering if she thought he was attractive. But Serena Artes, although at first she was quite shocked, but after looking at the young man's face with absolute confidence stated that he was literally her ideal. And then Ricardo Arena confessed that he was really very happy that his face had done well, if it had caught the girl's attention even for a second. And then an awkward Serena Artes thought that Ricardo Arena thought she was a very callous person who was only interested in appearances. Serena Artes wished Ricardo Arena a good night's rest. But when she was outside his door, she wondered why he had come so close to her. As a result, a little later, Serena Arts was practicing with Ricardo and stated that now that they were married, they could practice every day, because she had not felt so good for a long time. But Ricardo Arena calmly stated that if it was Serena's wish, they could have practiced all day long, and it was not a problem for him. But in the end, the protagonist calmly moved away from Ricardo's attack by pushing off and flying up into the sky, then flying downward for a cutting blow. And looking at Ricardo, Arena said that he should stop being so dramatic and get up as soon as possible, because he had almost pounded her into the ground a short time ago. But the next moment, the guy noticed that there was a scratch on his cheek, and so wiping the blood, he stated that he had unluckily caught on a splinter and offered to continue the fight. At that moment, Serena Arts excitedly approached and stated that she didn't mean to hurt him, but if he had ducked better, it wouldn't have happened. Then looking at his smiling face, she thought that she had only lived to see him smile lately, and hoped that Ricardo Urin's face would not be scarred. But the next moment, the butler came up and holding out a letter stated that the emperor had responded to Serena's invitation. And then opening the letter, the girl hoped that he would come, and she was very curious to get an answer from Eric Crovia. But when she opened the letter, she was sad to see that he wasn't going to come. But then she burned the letter stating that Eric Crovia had every right to do so, and she had only invited him as a courtesy anyway. I wondered if she literally knew Eric Crovia would do such a thing, so turning to the butler, she asked that he write some sort of response for Eric Crovia. But at that moment, she was approached by Ricardo Arena, who wanted to ask Serena something, but she thought he wanted to go back to the palace and promised to take him because she had to go to the meeting with the king. And then smiling sadly, Ricardo Arena started to leave and told Serena that in that case they would meet at the ball. But she looked at him in surprise, not understanding why he had become so sad. As a result, a little later, staying in his room, the young man rested, reflecting on all that had happened that day, and also remembered the words of the protagonist and her touch as she looked at his wound with concern, after which his whole face turned red with embarrassment, and he wondered how much longer it would take for him to get close to Serena, and took out his watch, which was always by his side, and pressed it close to his chest. Eventually, a little while later, Lori Haynes, sitting across from Serena Artes, thanked her for personally deciding to give her the invitation, and literally couldn't believe that her friend was actually having a ball soon, because it was really beautiful. But Serena Artes also calmly reported that she had to act quickly to create a surprise. But Lori Haynes Dash was trying to find out if she and her friend would be able to keep in touch when she got married. And the girl calmly convinced her that she could have divorced Ricardo Arena, but even so would never have parted with her friend. But Lori asked that the girl not even talk about divorce or even joke about such a thing, although she was pleased to hear such a thing, and said with a smile that no matter what Serena Artes decides, she'll always be there to support her. And in that moment, Serena Artes realized that no matter how you looked at it, her friend from her past life and Lori Haynes were really quite similar. As a result, a little later, Lori Haynes remembered how she had once angrily asked the man at the front desk why she was not allowed to take the entrance exam at the Imperial Academy, because she had not seen that there was any law that prohibited women from doing so. But the frightened man said it wasn't really the law, but that ladies of high society had to evolve in different directions. And a disgruntled Lori Haynes demanded that she be told what areas the man was thinking of and whether he meant tea party etiquette or the art of choosing a crown. But at that moment, the Duchess intervened and asked what they were doing here. And then all the aristocrats immediately started talking about the fact that the Duchess herself had come to them, And at that moment, Lori Aines realized that this was the only woman with such a title in the entire empire. And then the man at the front desk said that there had been a slight misunderstanding, but Serena Artes only asked if she remembered correctly that under imperial law, a woman could not receive a ducal title. Then turned her attention to Lori Aines and asked her to introduce herself. But when she said her name, the disgruntled knights immediately shouted that Lori was being very disrespectful. After all, she should have introduced herself to the Duchess properly. But Serena herself only said with a smile that it wasn't necessary. After all, she liked Lori Aines so much better. She then returned to their conversation about how she'd become a duchess even as a woman, and therefore the man had no reason not to allow Lady Lori Aines to take the exams. Then she demanded that the knights make sure that Lori Aines would definitely get into the exams, and she bowed and thanked the protagonist. And then remembering this, Lori Aines thought about how gorgeous the Duchess looked at that moment. And then thinking about it, Serena Arts realized that she really did feel like she could make a difference then. But in the end, Lori Aines couldn't get in, and so they started to make fun of her, saying that the entrance exams to the academy were still far too easy to be taken by girls who studied on their own. And others pitifully stated that she clearly shouldn't have been so hard on her, and that she would soon realize what her goal was and go looking for a good fiancé. And so, despite Serena's intervention, nothing had really changed. And that's why she wanted to apologize to Lori Aines. But she calmly said that it only happened that way because she lacked knowledge, and Serena Artis shouldn't blame herself. But she calmly stated that the only thing Lori Aines lacked was the support of her loved ones. But then Lori Aines literally glowed and reminded her that she still hadn't given up and was studying hard and trying to do her best. And then thinking about it, and Serena Arts realized that in a world where everyone was afraid of her, Lori Aines was one of the few people who had always treated her without prejudice. And she was as easy with her as she used to be with her friend. And in fact, the Duchess felt the same way when the prince offered her marriage in an understanding alley. And Serena Arts thought that perhaps she had a few guesses as to why Riccardo Arena was so interested in her. Eventually, a little while later, Serena Arts was at her estate. And that's when the prince handed her the letter and told her it was from his kingdom. And Serena was surprised that he had come just for that. But he stated that they should have opened it in the place, and with a smile explained that very soon they would already be married. And then thinking awkwardly, Serena Artes thought that most likely this letter was sent from the queen, that is the adoptive mother of Riccardo Arena. But when she opened the letter, she smelled the scent of rose and immediately guessed that the letter was completely impregnated with poison. As a result, a little later, Serena took off her poison-soaked gloves and began to read the letter, but noted that Riccardo Arena didn't seem at all surprised by this. But he only remarked that such assassination attempts were quite common, and he had survived quite a few assassination attempts in his time. But looking around, Serena Artes wondered if she was also completely unsurprised. But looking at her face, realized that it didn't seem worth asking. But Serena Artes did explain that in fact, the citizens of the defeated kingdom were constantly threatening her, and started writing. The queen wrote that news of the prince's impending marriage had reached them, and the king was delighted. However, the hidden meaning of such a phrase could be different, because the queen reported that the idiot king blessed their union, but the nobility was strictly deposed. So the prince had to abandon hopes of taking the throne, and Riccardo Arena managed to seduce the Duchess, but may not even hope to encroach on her kingdom. Serena Artes, furious at this treatment, did not know how to behave, for she had clearly realized the message that the queen had put in this letter, but the awkward prince only asked her to ignore it, and seemed to treat such threats as business as usual. But Serena Artes only said that she would not leave it alone, and even if it made the queen angry, she would do anything to make the wedding happen. Finally, putting on her dress a little later, Serena stated that she thought she would feel uncomfortable in the dress, but it was really great, and reflected that money could indeed buy happiness. And the maids cheerfully announced that they would take this reaction as a compliment to their labor, for they had never worked so hard. After which it was reported that not even Lady Olivia would be able to outshine Serena's beauty at the engagement ball. But Serena Artes was only somewhat saddened to think that Eric Crovia wouldn't be coming, and in that case, it was likely that Olivia wouldn't be there either. The next moment, there was a knock, and Riccardo Arena asked for the opportunity to come in, and when he appeared, Serena was happy to say that this outfit really suited him well. But the embarrassed young man only said that now Serena Artes looked much more beautiful than he did, and she quietly reflected on the fact that she also liked the way she looked. At that moment, Riccardo walked up to the maid and asked her to give him the necklace. And then I put it around her neck, and Serena Artis said she looked great in that kind of jewelry, and wondered if it would make equally fine jewelry for the Duchess. But she calmly looked over the young man and admitted that no groom in the world would look better with her than Ricardo, but then asked how long the young man was going to address her by title, and the awkward prince apologized. In the end, the aristocrats gathered at the ball, and then looking around, a man stated that the Duchess was just perfect, as one would expect. It was Duke Zenith, a member of the imperial house. But then came a luxurious carriage from which Lady Olivia emerged, and no one seemed surprised. Although people saw the emperor's emblem and thought for a moment that perhaps the emperor had arrived in person. But it seems that today he did not accompany his bride. In the end, Duke Zenith bowed and greeted the future empress, and she only stated that it had been a long time since they met last time and asked if he was doing well. But he calmly stated that everything was indeed in order, since there was not a single land of this great empire that was as prosperous as his, and asked if Olivia had heard that the stone in the engagement ring the Duchess gave her was the famous dragon's eye. But without letting Duke Zenith finish speaking, Prince Ricardo Arena appeared along with Duchess Serena and greeted their guests, surprised by the arrival of Duke Zenith. But he calmly stated that he couldn't miss the celebration in honor of the engagement of a man who had made a great contribution to the empire. And Serena Artes remarked that she was glad that the man had accepted her invitation after all. But after Duke Zenith stated that the scale of the event was clearly indicative of the Duchess' status. But she turned her attention to Duke Zenith's glass and immediately knocked it out of his hands, and then approaching the shards, Prince Ricardo Arena stated that it was a sleeping pill. And it seems Serena Arts wasn't lying when she said she often faced threats. And the disgruntled Duchess reflected that it seemed that even on such a bright day, an assassin from another country had sneaked into her territory, and immediately noticing him, she said she couldn't believe that this man was trying to poison her guests with a common sleeping pill, because it was really child's play. After that, giving a glass to the Duke already normal wine, offered him a drink, but he refused, thinking about the fact that even after the end of the war, Serena's life has not become calmer. After Serena Arts introduced Ricardo, the Duke of Zenith, and reminded her that Eric Crovia had previously introduced them to each other at the imperial ball. After that, Serena Artes said that they were co-workers, so they knew each other very well, and the Duke only stated that perhaps such a fact could surprise Ricardo Aaron, and asked if the principal was ready for the fact that such unpleasant incidents often happened to his fiancée, and therefore could also happen to him. But the lad only embarrassedly reported that it was the least he could repay for being with Lady Serena, and the Duke reflected that they really were perfect for each other. Whereupon the protagonist turned her attention to Lady Olivia, who had arrived, and so apologized for the late greeting and bowed. And everyone around them was very surprised, because they knew that their relationship was really quite tense. But afterwards, Olivia said with a smile that Eric Crovia, unfortunately, did not have the opportunity to attend such a party. Then she turned her attention to their wedding rings and stated that after receiving the news of the betrayal of the First Sword of the Empire, the Emperor personally granted Serena the priceless dragon's eye, not even imagining that it would be returned to the prince. And then everyone immediately began to excitedly discuss that the rumors were not false, and the rings were indeed made using the eye of the dragon. And it was a gem given to the empire by the kingdom, and Duke Zenith only reflected that he had not expected Olivia to be so straightforward at all. But at that moment, Olivia asked Prince Ricardo Arena how it felt to successfully win the heart of a duchess and reclaim her national treasure. But the prince was not at all confused by such a remark, and said that he could not agree with Lady Olivia's opinion because he and Serena were engaged. So it could be said that she was still the owner of the dragon's eye. Then he noticed that the opportunity to be near this beautiful girl is already a great honor for him. And all the aristocrats excitedly talked about Ricardo's words and could not believe that he really was so in love with the main character. After which the awkward Duchess said that usually everyone brags about their feelings to each other at the engagement ceremony, but they seem to be able to skip that part since everyone has already seen everything with their own eyes, and thanked everyone for coming to the party, wishing them a good and pleasant evening, and later wished them a safe journey home. In the end, after seeing the guests off, they went up the stairs, and Serena Artes noticed that Ricardo Arena was smiling and asked about the reason. But he embarrassedly said that he was very pleased that the protagonist decided to stand up for him. But she noticed that this guy was excited about absolutely every little thing. But the prince reflected that he truly believed he would never forget this ceremony. As a result, a little later, An insanely angry Serena Artis reflected on the fact that she literally could not tolerate the noble house. After all, they willingly accepted the heart of a dragon, but still refused to approve her engagement. But Eric Krovia told her to relax because there was nothing wrong with that, since they still hadn't approved his wedding and he had been engaged for a year. But Serena Artes noticed that Eric Krovia wasn't too bothered by that because he didn't even want to get married. And even though he was an emperor, he was still reckless in matters of state, and she wondered how he had time to do anything stupid. But he calmly explained that he just didn't devote his whole life to work. And then Serena Artes grudgingly reflected that she trusted Duke Zenith, but for saving him, he had paid her back with a knife. But Eric Krovia remarked that it was probably not so hard for the Duke to go up against the rest of the nobles, and even Eric was not so easy to argue with them, even though he was the emperor. But the disgruntled protagonist thought it was time to stop messing with them and go on the offensive. But Eric Krovia asked her to calm down, and if she decided to make a mess, to do it in such a way that he could clean up after her. But Eric Krovia remembered that Olivia wanted to meet with Serena in person, and he didn't know the reason why, but she wanted to give her something. And then thinking about it, and Serena Arts had absolutely no idea what reason Olivia had for wanting to meet with her. And Eric Krovia only joked that she'd already enlisted the support of the future empress. On the afterward recalled that Serena Arthas had independently earlier declined the seat of empress, and she grudgingly didn't understand why he'd even brought it up. Then memories crept into her head of how she had thought that the fact that such an independent young lady had been given a ducal title must have shocked all the aristocrats. But she still didn't have the power to make her whims come true. And then turning to her, Eric Krovia said that in that case, she could become empress, and if she accepted his offer, she would have enormous power, and he would be able to help her as well as relieve her of unpleasant duties that did not interest her. And remembering this, Serena Arts stated that she was much younger then, but when the emperor tried to make her a similar proposal again, she stated that Eric Krovia was also young then. And then thinking about her words, Eric Krovia realized that Serena Artes had always built a stone wall between them whenever they touched on the subject, and it was as if she were warning him not to go any further. But then she changed the subject and seriously inquired what Lady Olivia was talking about. And then Eric Krovia said that she had suggested that the girl stop for tea with the prince. And then thinking about it, Serena Artes suggested that maybe she wanted to apologize for the strange situation at the ball, but realized that was hardly possible. Eventually, when they got to Olivia, she expressed her hopes that Serena Artes would be cool with the confession she wanted to make, after which she confessed her immense love for Serena. And Serena Artes immediately realized that they always had not the most pleasant relationship, and she was strange to hear such confessions. So she thought that the girl was just joking and tried to understand what she really wanted. But she explained that Serena Artes may not remember it, but back when she was a young debutante taking her first steps in high society, and she had a deep respect for Serena. And at the time, all the ladies felt that kind of respect for the main character, because it really couldn't be otherwise, because all the other girls saw their goal only in finding a good fiancé and gaining status in society. But the Duchess was always different. She was the woman who held the whole duchy in her hands. And so Olivia hoped that the Duchess would become empress, and everyone expected that thanks to her great changes would come to the empire. But at this point, the awkward girl interrupted her speech and informed her that she had a small question and wanted to know why she should tell it now. And that's when Ricardo entered the conversation and realized it was probably because they were engaged. And if Serena Artes marries, she'll have a family and stay in the empire. And so Olivia wanted to know if Serena Artes intended to finally secure the title of Duchess and make a stunning change in the life of the empire. But Olivia calmly stated that Serena's fiancé was pretty smart. But Serena Artes just calmly apologized for not living up to expectations, because her loyalty to this country was so deep, and she was very tired of countless killing and saving others, and so now she wanted to save herself. Then Olivia said that she understood because the Serena Arts had been through a lot over the years. She just wanted to say that if Serena's opinion changed, she would always be there for her. Finally, when their tea party was over, Serena Arts reflected that she seemed to underestimate Olivia, but she noticed that Ricardo was in a bad mood, which wasn't like him, and wondered what had happened to him. But he stated that it was strange to see a previously kind and hospitable woman selfishly demanding to work for her home in Empire, and he just felt sad about Serena's life. And then a thoughtful Serena Arts realized that Richard Ricardo Arena was going through something similar, and he was probably tired of it by now. So it was no wonder he was so worried. But Serena Artes calmed him down by telling him that at least Olivia had been honest with her, and Olivia herself had admitted that he had placed all those expectations on her out of her own speculation. And she could also be understood when she failed to refrain from commenting when the jewels of the empire glittered on the finger of a foreign prince. But the prince was just thinking that he didn't like it when any of the nobles or Olivia tried to use Lady Serena for their own purposes. And he wondered if there was another way to keep the nobles from doing so. And then thought he had plans to suggest to Serena that she keep Lady Olivia at bay for a while, and they could make a joke about the noble house, since the source of all the trouble was its members. But surprised, Serena Arts didn't know what the guy meant. But when I looked at his face, I realized that he was really angry, even though he tried to hide it. And he obviously needed a place to vent that anger, so I asked him about his ideas. And Ricardo said that before arriving in the Empire, he heard an unimaginably intriguing rumor that a noble house was holding its own casino. And at first glance, it is just an ordinary place for entertaining tourists and a place where aristocrats from all over the world can relax and enjoy the evening. But there was one peculiar rule, namely that members of the imperial family were forbidden to go. And then I remember Serena Artes stated that she was in that place, and the ban was put in place under the pretext that a visit to such an establishment by a member of the imperial family could cause an unpleasant diplomatic incident. But Arena warned Ricardo that it was indeed dangerous to target this place, and of course destroying the playground that the nobles had worked so hard to build is very nice. But in this war, not all issues can be solved by brute force. And in return, they would get hit with the same force as them, and it could have a negative effect on their marriage. But Ricardo Arena said he didn't offer to forcefully destroy the casino and offered to take it. And then he reminded her of the dragon's heart. And after listening to his plan and Serena Artes thinking it was time for her to change her career from being the world's strongest duchess to a jewel, Serena Artes ended up going to the residences of Duke Zenith, who was really surprised by her visit, and asked what the Duchess wanted to discuss with him. But she merely stated that she did not think she needed any special reason for meeting an old comrade. And moreover, he was at their ball, so visiting guests was a common thing. Though she thought that today they had an entirely different reason for this visit, and so wondered if it was true that the dragon heart she had given to the noble house was in the possession of the Duke of Zenith. But the man said with a smile that the girl was well informed as always, and it was true that he had been asked to see to the preservation of the gem. But Serena Artes only stated that earlier she had thought that the preservation of the gem was the Marquis' duty, for he was the representative of a noble house. But the Duke declared that he also supposed it would be more proper to entrust the jewel to him. But everyone else was sure that Serena Artes would have tried to destroy the dragon's heart if it had been kept at the Marquis' estate. And then the disgruntled girl thought that it was really strange that the aristocrats were so afraid of her, and yet still refused to allow her engagement. So Serena Arts was already thinking that wherever that gem was stored, she would wipe it into powder. But Ricardo tried to calm the girl so that she would not forget that they were only here to steal a heart, not to destroy it. But eventually they heard a scream and someone begging to be allowed to auction the pink diamond, because although it wasn't as good as the dragon's heart, it was really worthy of attention. And then hearing that, the Duchess wondered what was going on and what the pink diamond was. But at that moment, the Duke said that if he had known that Serena Artes was coming to visit him, he would not have allowed anyone else to visit him, and said that it was unlikely that Serena Artes would be happy to see his guest. Finally, when the doors opened, a man looked at the Duchess who had arrived and greeted her. It was the Marquis and head of the noble house. And then, trying to brighten things up, the Duke awkwardly stated that it seemed the living room was too small for so many people. But Marquez just calmly informed that he hadn't seen Serena in a long time and apologized for his rudeness by saying that he would have liked to properly say hello to Serena, but his old body was no longer able to stand up as easily as before. But the protagonist silently walked by and took the apple that was on the tray, and then asked Ricardo Arena to move aside a little, and when he moved away, an apple flew past him with great speed, which blew away the armored glass behind which the dragon's heart was hidden. And at this moment, the Marquis with lightning speed rose up, running up to the statue and shouting that his dragon heart was going to survive. But Serena Artes calmly noted that earlier Marquez had claimed that his health was failing him, but it seemed that it was not so difficult for him to get up, and asked if Marquez was now ready to say hello to her properly. as he had wanted to do earlier. In the end, a little later, Serena Arts was playing cards with Ricardo and noticed that although her body was fine, but her head really hurt because she did not expect to see that old snake from the noble house. But she managed to check the statue, so the deed was already done, and she was pleased that at the end the Marquis even apologized for his ignorance, even though it was casual. Ricardo thought about it for a moment, but it seemed to be quite advanced, but he was still far from Serena's strength. But at that moment, she asked Ricardo about the voice they'd heard in the corridor earlier, for it seemed familiar to her. But he calmly informed her that it was the Baron's, and explained that it was the young man at the Countess's literary evening who was always outraged and trying to start a fight. Serena Artes admitted that his words caught her by surprise, because even in the Kingdom, pink is considered quite valuable as it appears extremely rare. And she could not believe that the Baron had such a valuable gem. It was truly unexpected, but thought about the fact that she had previously been the person who had self-destructed the most valuable of all the pink gems. But Ricardo calmly stated that he wasn't sure if the girl had read the recent gossip, but because of his gambling, the Baron has several huge debts hanging over him, and the debts were so huge that he had to sell all his possessions, and they say the pink diamond is the last thing he has left. And Ricardo assumed that the Baron had come to that literary evening with the purpose of taking a loan. But upon reflection, Serena Arts said that it was extremely strange, because it was said that the pink diamond had been stolen. But at the Duke of Zenith's estate, he said otherwise and claimed that he wanted to put it up for auction, and wondered if it was possible to trade what was stolen. But Ricardo Arena calmly explained that there was no theft, and he used the pink diamond to take out a loan, but later squandered the money. And then, thinking Serena Artes, realized the reason why the Ram wanted to sell the diamond quickly and anonymously, because then everyone would have the impression that the stolen gem appeared at the auction, which would be a confirmation of the theft. But at that moment, the guy calmly approached and covered the girl with a plaid, explaining that he thought her outfit was too light and that he was worried she might be cold. But she calmly reported that she was actually fine, except for the fact that she was missing a heart, and wondered if Ricardo Arena thought that a little cold would make her shiver. But he calmly reported that he had no doubt that Serena Arts was much more resilient and apologized for worrying too much. But at this moment, the girl was very much deploring herself for such a cold relationship. And at such moments, she especially feels that the real heart was better. But then she realized that maybe there wasn't much difference between a real heart and a fake one. And the thought popped into her head. So she told Ricardo Arena that she had an idea and they could change their plan a bit and convince the Ram that they would sell this pink diamond. And then he would bring the diamond to them, and in that case, they could swap the pink diamond with the dragon's heart. A little later, they went to the casino, and then looking around, Serena Artes stated that she hadn't been to this place in a long time, and it had become much more spectacular than she remembered it. And since there were nobles coming here even from neighboring kingdoms, business was most likely booming, and Ricardo Arena only stated that she didn't expect Serena Artes to come here so often, but she explained that she had only been here once because she hadn't been sent an invitation since Eric Crovia had appointed her as his assistant. But the next moment, the nobles saw her and began to whisper that it was the Duchess. They wanted to understand how she got here, because the imperial aides were also forbidden to enter this place. But at that moment, the guy took the main character by the hand, and then she smilingly said that she did not even expect him to dare such an act. After all, earlier he behaved with restraint, but he calmly explained that they needed to get inside as soon as possible, as the auction would soon begin. And then, with all the determination, and Serena Artes said they had to bring it to a successful conclusion. As a result, one of the lots in the auction was a painting of a great landscape by a prominent artist from the central region, and its starting price was 5,000 gold coins. But at that moment, the 10,000 bet, which belonged to Serena, came out sharply. And then the girl was thinking that she must take revenge on these aristocrats for all the times they had kept away from her, and she must take every lot for this evening, and then they would all realize how badly they had treated her. In the end, the next lot was the jewel of the ruling dynasty, a magnificent emerald necklace that Serena Artes picked up for 7,000 gold pieces. The next lot wasn't even advertised until Serena Artes picked it up for 8,000. And then, under the gazes of disgruntled aristocrats, awkward Ricardo admitted that his arm was already starting to hurt because of the fact that she so often bets. But the Duchess only apologized and said that she simply could not restrain herself at such a moment, but ended up announcing the top item in today's auction the next moment, And the last item is one of the only 2 items in the entire component. And that's when Serena Arts immediately realized that this was what they needed. And the real purpose of their participation today of the auction is a pink diamond, and then everyone around them thought it was a dragon's heart. But then they realized that it was probably the same pink diamond that belonged to the ram and the diamond that was stolen. But at that moment, Duke Zenith was approached by a servant who said that it was the same gem, but he only stated that the barn had managed to place it on the auction block, probably with someone's help. And then watching this picture, Ricardo Arena noticed that it was quite expected that the Duke would not remain cold-blooded to the situation that had happened. But Serena Arts did not care much, because she knew that the Duke would realize that it was they who had helped Baron, and wonder how high his cost would be. Eventually, the auction guide noticed that the attendees might have questions about the authenticity of the rare item, and so they had the best appraiser on the continent with them to confirm that it was indeed a pink diamond. And then looking at it, he said that it was a pink diamond, but looking at it carefully, he thought that it was strange, and most likely it was a dragon's heart. But noticing such a delay in the estimator, the guy awkwardly informed me that it seemed the job would take a little longer. But at that moment, Serena Artes spoke up and said that she knew exactly what was in the jewelry box, and hoped someone could explain to her how the dragon heart she had given to the noble house had ended up here. Serena Artes ended up looking at the stone in surprise a few days before, and couldn't believe that Ricardo Arena had actually been able to do it. But he calmly said he was only following her orders. And the Baron said he didn't care if they sold the gem or crushed it. What matters to him is that they helped to take revenge on the noble house. And he said that some low-ranking aristocrats were also treated with disdain, and also apologized for his behavior at that literary evening. And so the awkward prince stated that in fact the noble house had as many more enemies than he had expected. As a result, Ricardo Arena asked that the girl tell him her plans, but she calmly said that first they had to make the ram's diamond look exactly like the dragon's heart, and why they had to swap it around so discreetly that no one could tell the difference. And also, she will even put an illusion on the Duke's residence until the auction is over. And so when the real dragon heart is placed in the auction, it will look like the nobles are trying to sell the jewels she gave them. And the ram's diamond will be found in the same place in the house of the Duke of Zenith. And then thinking Ricardo Arena stated that everyone will be sure that the noble house stole the ram's diamond, and it will mean that their plan succeeded. In the end, though the girl had planned it all out, but there was trouble when she went to steal the stone, because the defense magic had indeed been improved in the Duke's place after her visit, and so she already realized that it was a problem for an ordinary person. But she was an unusual person, and so something like this didn't even make her break a sweat. Though the Duchess reflected that it was time for her to go back. But at that moment, she managed to hide at the last second before a maid suddenly entered the room to check if everything was all right with the dragon's heart. And then the girl hiding behind a column reflected that she had managed at the last moment to place the fake in the stag. So now the real dragon heart was back in her hands. But she didn't understand what it was the maid was doing now of late. And afterwards, she noticed her taking the fake stone from the deer. But at that moment, the order was given to search every corner and find the thief, for he could have been anywhere. The maid then disappeared into the room, where the guards noticed her and began to ask her what she was doing. But she pretended to be a little lost and went on her way. And then overhearing this conversation, Serena immediately realized that that maid was very strange, but knew now that the statue wasn't even a pink diamond, but some cheap knockoff. And so I decided to cast another illusion protection spell on the statue. I'm glad she's at least got the dragon's heart back now, but I thought she should look at that maid. And so now they fairly rose to inquire how the noble house had dared to auction her gift at all. And Ricardo thought Serena made a marvelous actress as well. But the auction guide awkwardly asked Serena Arts to calm down, because the appraisal wasn't over yet. The appraiser behind him tried to tell him that he had already finished the appraisal and was sure it was the dragon's heart. But the disgruntled Duchess then turned to the appraiser and said she advised him to state clearly what he saw in front of him and dispense with any jokes. And then he declared that this diamond was indeed the jewel of the kingdom and the heart of the dragon, and the outraged nobles literally could not believe that the noble house auctioned off the Duchess's gift.